Welcome to Connect, Engage, Transform webinar series hosted by UNC Rural and Carolina Center for Public Service. My name is Giselle Corby-Smith. I'm Associate Provost for Rural Initiatives. This is the second of 4 webinars that are focused on rural partnerships in a pandemic. We want to highlight and encourage authentic, effective, and sustainable collaborations for the public good. As UNC-Chapel Hill and communities throughout rural North Carolina have adapted to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic during a year that has also showcased ongoing racial injustice and a controversial election, we want to seek to highlight ways that the university community partnerships have evolved through this time together. Connect, Engage, Transform, or CET for short, was originally an in-person conference hosted for the first time last year, right around this time, at the Friday Center, organized by the Center for Public Service and UNC Rural, which was a brand new campus unit at the time. Last year's conference also focused on university community partnerships based in rural North Carolina. Over 250 people attended the 2020 conference, and we were delighted to have lots of positive feedback about participants' experiences. We've designed this series of webinars to keep the conversations going and to check in on with how those very same partnerships highlighted in last year's conference have adapted to the pandemic. Today's topic is navigating the pathways to college, and Director of UNC Rural, my colleague Meredith Bazemore, will introduce the panelists and moderate the session. In addition to directing UNC Rural, Meredith is also the director of the Office of Rural Initiatives for the UNC School of Medicine. In that role, she's responsible for coordinating efforts to recruit, educate, and train students committed to serving in rural and underserved North Carolina. She works with community, campus, and funding partners to identify strategies and programs that strengthen pipelines for rural and underserved areas of North Carolina to health careers. Meredith has an MPA from UNC Pembroke and is passionate about growing programs that support first-generation students and from other disadvantaged backgrounds on their path to higher education. Meredith, thanks so much for leading today's session.
Thanks for the introduction. I am so excited to have this opportunity, and it's really great to see so many folks on the call today. I've been really fortunate to, in my career, get to work with some of the panelists today and also spend time in Rockingham County. And so I'm really excited to hear today's conversation. In terms of agenda, we're going to do some introductions, and then we will transition to the panelist presentations. And then we're going to host some breakout rooms where you all can continue the conversation and think about follow-up questions for the panelists. I'm going to introduce everyone that will be speaking today to start us off. And then as that concludes, I'd love to ask you all, just given the number of folks on the call, I don't want to spend too much time doing personal introductions, but if you can drop in the chat where you're from and who you are, that would be really fantastic so we can get a sense of who's on the call today. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce Dr. Cindy. And Cindy, I really don't want to mispronounce your last name, but I'm going to assume, I'm hoping it's pronounced like it's spelled Corcoran? Does that sound close to right, Yolanda? All right, I'm looking to the Yolanda for some thumbs up. Okay, great. Dr. Cindy Corcoran is the Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Support Services in Rockingham County Schools. She has served in the field of education since 1984, when she began her career as a classroom teacher. She has served as a classroom teacher, assistant principal, director of elementary education in Title I, executive director of the Exceptional Children's Program, and now in her current position. She received her MS in Education Administration from Shenandoah University in 2004. Her educational, as you come on the call, if you could hit mute, that would be fantastic. Just as a reminder to all the participants, thanks. So Dr. Corcoran received her educational specialist degree from Appalachian State in 2007 and her EDD in Educational Leadership and Cultural Foundations from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro in 2012. She has presented at national, state, and local conferences and has served served as the liaison to the college advisors that serve Rockingham County schools for the past 6 years. Matt Queen, who will also be speaking as part of the first portion of the session, is the college advisor at J.M. Moorhead High School. He graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a BA in Economics and Political Science in 2019. While at Carolina, Queen was a Moorhead Kane Scholar, the president of the Daily Tar Heel Board of Directors, and a member of Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society. He also served as an advocate at the Community Empowerment Fund, a nonprofit devoted to empowering community members struggling with or affected by homelessness. Queen's goal as a college advisor is to facilitate college access for every student who wishes to pursue post-secondary education. After Cindy and Matt present, we'll hear from Yolanda Keith, the Associate Director for the Office of Undergraduate Admissions and Program Director for the College Advising Corps, Carolina College Advising Corps. So I'll hold off on your introduction, Yolanda, till we introduce you and your slides. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
So
thank you all for being here.
Oh. Thank you so much, Meredith. We appreciate you. We're actually going to transition a little bit. I think based off of the folks that are in the room, which is extremely exciting to see so many students, we're going to talk a little bit about the program and then allow Matt to talk a lot about his life as an advisor, the issues, challenges, and great successes he's been seeing in Rockingham County.
Well, in that case, I would love to introduce you at the same time, just so folks know who you are. As I said earlier, I had been really privileged to get to work with Yolanda in previous experiences, and I'm inspired by the work that her group is doing. So I'm really excited to introduce her to you all today. Yolanda Keith is from Burgall, North Carolina. She has an Associate of Arts degree in Business Education from Cape Fear Community College, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a Master's of Public Administration from North Carolina Central University. She is currently pursuing her EDD in Educational Leadership with a focus in higher education. She has served as Program Director of the Carolina College Advising Corps and as Senior Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill since 2010. She strives to bridge the gap between secondary and post-secondary institutions through collaboration, sharing of knowledge, and community engagement. Prior to her current role, she worked with the National Office of the College Advising Corps, supporting operations and budgeting. Keith is committed to public service, college access, and serving disadvantaged communities. And I will turn it over to you all.
Thank you so much, Meredith. I appreciate that. And I will say I am very inspired and extremely excited to see so many students that are in acknowledging where they're from in the chat. I see a number of locations that we have advisors and some places that we'd love to expand to add more advisors. So that's just wonderful. Thank you so much for acknowledging that. Again, my name is Yolanda Keith. I serve as the director of the Carolina College Advising Corps. And what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about the program and then hand it off to the expert in this space, Mr. Matt Queen, who is actually doing college advising, serving students, and supporting folks as they progress students positively to their future. So next slide, Matt. All right, so just to talk a little bit about the Carolina College Advising Corps, what we do is hire recent graduates of UNC-Chapel Hill to serve as college advisors throughout the state. And so advisors are selected to serve first generation, low income and underrepresented students as they navigate their path to college. So if you could just take a moment and just really reflect on what your experience was like when you went off to college, think about those great moments, those when you found out that you were accepted, but also those moments of anxiety when you were uncertain about what was actually going to happen in your future. Our advisors go into high schools and they basically are have access to all the students within the school to be able to support and guide them. So they're doing outreach to students, having one-on-ones with students, classroom presentations with students, to be able to make sure that they understand their ability to really thrive in a post-secondary 2 or 4 year institution, and to make sure that they feel empowered, encouraged, and inspired to really think big about what their future should be. Next slide, Matt. This is a snapshot of our program. So we've been in existence since 2007, 2008. When we first started our program, we actually partnered with high schools that were in jeopardy of being shut down. So these are schools that the state actually said, you know what, there's some issues or challenges within your schools, and we need to add additional resources to make sure that the students are actually thriving and being successful in their futures. These were schools that may have had higher graduation rates, higher teacher turnover rates, but they were schools that we saw that we could go in and potentially make an impact. As we've expanded our program, again, that first generation low income underrepresented student acknowledgement has been something that we've been true to and have wanted to adhere to. So we've been fortunate to be able to expand to a number of schools across the state, and about 14,000 high school seniors have access to a college advisor. Next slide, Matt. So to talk a little bit about our model. So again, we place recent graduates in high schools across the state. The advisors have access to all the schools and all the students in the school. And how that happens is with great synergy, partnership, communication, and just alignment with high schools. And so the advisor serves in the high school full time. They walk alongside the counselors, the administrators, the teachers. They think innovatively about their approaches. They're collaborating and filling a gap to support students as they move forward with their post-secondary choices. What we know is that the counselor-student ratio across our country, and more specifically in North Carolina, is high. I think in North Carolina, it's running about 270 to one student, right? 270 students to one counselor, excuse me. And what that kind of equates to is only a small chunk of minutes, so maybe about 20 to 30 minutes of time per year for each student to have access to their counselor, to be able to talk about college initiatives. We also know that the schools that we support are schools where there may be other needs that are high within the school, right? So we're thinking about things that Matt will talk about with regards to food insecurity or social wellness of students, other things that counselors need to utilize their professional presence for to be able to support and guide students. And again, we go in and we just supplement with regards to the college piece. These are actually our key performance indicators. These are the things that we like our students to do and how and things that guide the movement of the advisors on a traditional situation pre and hopefully post-COVID. The way that we kind of look at it is the more of these things we can get a student to engage in, the higher probability they'll actually enroll into an institution. And so the advisors are charged to think about these KPIs and again, think very creatively about how to engage students, empower them, and have them own their college navigation process. And so we're thinking very, very much in colors, very vividly, and polka dots, plaids, all outside of the box to be able to, again, engage students in this process. We also know that oftentimes first generation low income or underrepresented students may have challenges in kind of thinking about what that trajectory looks like, right? So we're thinking about the FAFSA application, and there may be some people in this room that have filled out the FAFSA and it may have been very simplistic for them, but oftentimes it may be a little bit more complicated for others, right? And so we're thinking about knowing that language within that FAFSA application, if their family circumstances or situations are a little bit different, being able to help and guide them actually step by step through that application process. Next slide, Matt. Again, we're a data-driven organization. We have KPIs, but we also look at what our impact looks like and are reflective on what that is. And so what we don't do is go into a school and just shuffle students off to a post-secondary institution. We like to say that we are aligning students with institutions that will serve them well and they will successfully graduate from. So other data that we look at is actually college enrollment data. And so what we've seen is our college enrollment rate is actually higher than a school at our schools is higher than the average when a school does not have a college advisor. In addition to that, we've also looked at our persistence rates. And we believe that the mentorship and guidance of the advisor as they navigate to college, and oftentimes as they build that relationship after they get into college, helps a student persist at that institution. So an example of that is visiting a school to go visit an advisor and actually seeing that a high school student was actually there working with an advisor during their sophomore year to fill out the FAFSA. Next slide, please. All right, so that tells you a little bit about our program. I'm going to hand it off to Matt so he can talk a little bit about his experience. And then the hope is that later on, as we're kind of having this continued conversation, we can answer any questions that you have. So thank you so much. There you go, Matt.
Thanks so much, YK. So as she mentioned, I am currently the advisor at John Motley Moorhead High School in Eden, North Carolina. Eden is located in Rockingham County, a county that, oddly enough, is pretty close to where I grew up. I grew up 2 counties down in Randolph County, went to Asheboro High School, and I didn't really have it on my radar while I was in college that I had an aspiration to serve as a college advisor. I did have an advisor while I was in high school. He was the former assistant director at the Corps, Mr. Michael Dyson. But I did know that what I wanted to do between undergrad and whatever my next opportunity was to become part of a community. And the community that I ended up becoming a part of was Rockingham County. So I'll tell you a bit about my high school, a bit about my students, and I'll talk about my day-to-day, the things that I did before COVID hit and the things that I've been doing since. Moorhead High School is a 2A school. We have about between 800 and 900 students. That fluctuates. And as you can imagine, in Rockingham County, it is a rural county, and the resources are often, there is a disparity between resources in our county and many other counties in the state. And so this is a quick snapshot of what my advising looked like before the pandemic hit. Obviously, there's not a lot of social distancing happening in these photos. The photo on the left was an example of a field trip we took to UNC-Chapel Hill. We also took field trips to NC-A&T, UNC Charlotte, UNC Greensboro, and while I'm trying to remember, Rockingham Community College. And the photo in the middle is the kickoff to an event called North Carolina Countdown to College. I don't know if you remember that, maybe while you were in high school, but it's an opportunity for all North Carolina students to apply to many schools for free. And so we had a big event. We got students hyped up. It was somewhat of a pep rally, and we encouraged them to really think hard about their next steps. And then also, you notice these are all Instagram posts. I use my Instagram as kind of a platform to reach students while they're not at school. And that was sort of like the extent to which I used technology last year, Instagram and email. But I will say, like, last year is when I fell in love with the job. I would go an entire day and realize, wow, I didn't eat lunch and it's 4:30. And all I did was just like walk around and speak to students, go into the cafeteria and just sit down for like 3 lunch periods and like run into different students of all grades. And it just felt like the land of milk and honey, right? Abundance. It was easy to get in contact with students, build relationships with them, especially students that may not be as involved in after school activities. But I also became involved in those. So I went to theater events, arts performances. I started coaching. I coached girls soccer and also cross country. And so really becoming a part of a community, as I mentioned in the beginning, was sort of like my aspiration. And that's what I was able to do last year when everything could happen in person. But as we know, that did not continue. So we had to sort of, as advisors, not just me, but as rural advisors, as advisors across the state, rewrite our playbook and use our, I guess, Yolanda may not like me saying this, but use our youthfulness and our resources of like our knowledge of technology to be able to reach students where they are. We are a near peer model. So one of the things that means is that we are a bit more in tune than many of the staff members at our high schools to where the students are when they're online, when they're at home. So Instagram, right? I mentioned that earlier. Using Calendly to book appointments, using Remind, using Zoom. Like we're on Zoom right now. We're tired of Zoom, but it's a great tool. Linktree, Google Voice, Twitter, GroupMe. All these things became like my lifelines to my students. but it became more than that because you can't do school completely online. There's still like senior photos and different opportunities for students to come pick up packets from the school. So I had to learn to be extremely opportunistic. Like last week, students came in for exams, and I noticed one student who I've been sending texts to and emails and Instagram messages to all year, haven't heard back from him once. And he walks through the door, and I read off his name, and I look, and I recognized it from my email chain. I'd never seen him in person. I said, "Where have you been, man? Let's talk about college. I know you're about to take an exam, but like, have you thought about what you may want to do?" And I didn't get too far into the conversation, but that student actually reached out to me the next day, and we had a Zoom, and we've been talking since. So whereas last year I may have just like let that pass and think like, oh, I'll get him tomorrow in class. This year we have to be extremely opportunistic. And anytime we see an opportunity to reach out to a student, even if it's for half a second, definitely we take that opportunity. I will also say that we learned a lot about students this year, especially students in our county. They're resilient, they're adaptive, they're resourceful. Many students spend a lot of time, in addition to their schoolwork, supporting their families. And that comes from a number of different methods. So often they work, but sometimes it's taking care of younger siblings. And so we wonder where our students are, why they're not doing their homework, or why they're not applying to college the way we want them to. When you check up on them, send them an Instagram message, send them a meme or something, and they respond like, "Hey, Mr. Queen, like it's great to hear from you. Sorry, I've been taking care of my 4-year-old sister. And or my mom has COVID, and I've been trying to make sure that everybody has enough food. Like I'm going by the school and picking up meals and things like that." So we've learned that our students they've surprised me. Like you look at them and you realize, they're more than just high school kids who are just like scrolling through Instagram all the time. Like they're living real life right now. And there's a lot more going on than what meets the eye. So at least I have decided that I should mirror their resilience and resourcefulness and adaptiveness and try to emulate that in the way I move. So I've been trying to even more so meet students where they are. When students are picking up anything from the school at any point, I try to be front and center for any kind of in-person interaction, obviously with a mask on, staying socially distanced, but trying to give them as many resources as as I possibly can. We do food pickup here at Moorhead for students who have food insecurity. I try to be present at least once a week out there. It's around lunchtime, so obviously schedules get busy, but just trying to be present. And it does look very different than last year. The faucet isn't wide open with student interactions like it was last year, but I do think that I've gained a greater appreciation for the issues facing this county than I would have had last year when it was kind of like just below the surface. Now I'm really digging into it as I'm having these conversations with students and learning about the circumstances their families are facing. And this pandemic in many ways has aggravated those circumstances, or at least made them even more visible to us as school staff. And YK alluded briefly to the role that we play in like counseling services, especially identifying things that the counseling staff here at Moorhead and the social workers and the professionals who are trained in those areas need to be aware of. And so that's often true. Like anytime I hear of something that that doesn't sound quite right, or that sounds like something that needs to be addressed immediately, often our counselors may not have heard or may not have ever even realized that was going on beyond the conversations like that started with me working with a student on their FAFSA. And pretty soon I'm figuring out like there's a lot going on here that maybe the school can help with. And in fact, the school should be doing something to help with. So that's just something that, silver lining with COVID, having even more conversations and like really learning what's going on with our students and trying to serve them even more effectively, not just as a college advisor, but as a mentor and as someone who's a crucial resource at the school. And I think This doesn't just go for rural advisors. This doesn't just go for Rockingham County advisors. This doesn't just go for the Moorhead High School College advisor. This is advisors all across the state. And that's sort of how the program is built. And then we spoke about partnerships briefly at the beginning. This is an example of one of our core meetings. And you can see all those smiling faces. I am in the middle and I neglected to smile. I don't know what I was doing with my face, but I really think this is another great opportunity that we have as far as partnerships go. I mean, I speak regularly with advisors who work in Eastern North Carolina and in Robeson County and in Mecklenburg County. And because of Zoom, because we've been forced into the space where we need to collaborate, I think that we're able to share more information. We're able to be even more nimble. We're able to innovate at a quicker pace. And this is just an example of that. So we have these meetings regularly. We meet with supervisors regularly via Zoom. Because I'm a second year advisor, I have 2 first-year advisors who I meet with once a week. I'm their assigned mentor, but often they're sharing a lot of things that I'm like, wow, I should steal that idea and use it for my students. So there's a lot of information being shared across the core. And so that's like within the core, but also that information is being shared with people in the community, like Rockingham Community College, and people who work within Moorhead High School, like the counseling staff and student services as well. And then I'll briefly talk about myself. So I knew going in that I had an aspiration to potentially continue my education. So I'm planning on attending law school next year. And I think that the value of this experience for me was, I knew from reading and from attending Carolina and just learning about a lot of the issues that students in our state face, that these things are real. But once you see it on a micro basis, on a micro level, in a rural high school, and working with students and building relationships with students, it really becomes a lot more compelling, at least for my mission and my personal passions. So this experience has really solidified my desire to do that. And although I'm not really sure what I want to do with my next degree, this has really informed and framed my thinking in such a way that I know I wouldn't have had if I hadn't done it. So if you want to learn more about what college advisors do on a daily basis, you can follow my Instagram. The Instagram is my college advising Instagram, where you can see, hey, if you have someone you're close to who's applying to college, you can find information there, but also you can sort of see the work that advisors do on a daily basis. That's also my advising Twitter. And if you want to follow my personal LinkedIn, that's also linked there. But I really appreciate you all paying attention and listening, and I look forward to answering questions and continuing to participate in this webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. And Matt, there were a couple of things you said that I just wanted to sort of highlight, and in terms of thinking about partnerships as a whole. I love the fact that you made a point to say anytime you find an opportunity, it's a chance to connect, right? So I think about this more broadly outside of just your role as a college advisor, but partnerships in general, that in this space we find ourselves, that being really intentional and taking advantage of any opportunity that's presented to engage with community partners feels really important, and has maybe been magnified in a way that we hadn't seen prior to COVID. So I thought that was a really important point. And then the other piece that I thought was really, that I wanted to highlight and sort of lift up, was this idea of thinking about the students from an asset-based perspective, right? And we think about this in terms of our conversations with UNC Rural, that often what gets framed as the communities are under-resourced and all of these things, and we know that there are unique challenges in our rural and underserved spaces, but there is incredible resilience and resourcefulness and adaptability that is often overlooked. And so I love the fact that you really talked about that in terms of how your students were adapting, and that your own perspective and reflection of you needed to reflect how your students were navigating through your work as well. And I think that sort of thinking about all the strengths and assets of our individuals and communities, and those individuals in those communities, is just such an important piece. So I just wanted to say thank you again, and thank you to all the college advisors who are on this call and doing this work. I did have one question, and before I set you all off into breakout rooms, and I hope this is okay. I think I'm following this agenda. But I know I've read a lot and heard a lot about sort of internet challenges and broadband access, particularly in areas of our state that are considered rural and underserved. Matt or others, I would love to hear how you have been navigating that with your students if they haven't had access to materials online, or again, thinking about how students have been adaptive and responsive and flexible in their learning environment.
Yeah,
So
so
just love to hear your thoughts on that.
yes, thank you. So I see Dr. Corcoran has joined the Zoom. I wonder if she could talk a little bit about what that looks like from a district perspective. Oh, I think you're muted a bit.
Sorry, yes, I am.
Okay.
Let me just go back. I was trying to answer a question on chat, so I didn't quite hear all the question. Maybe somebody could just repeat that for me. I was trying to engage in chat since I kind of got to this a little late.
Yeah, so one, I was thanking Matt for sort of talking through this idea of asset-based experiences and how resourceful and resilient and adaptable individuals in rural communities are. And I think COVID has really, in some ways, magnified in a really great way and highlighted how we need to rethink policies to impact communities. But also, I think it has really shown us how incredibly wonderfully resourceful our rural communities are, right? The fact that they are still doing all of these things and finding opportunities to connect. And so I was curious, thinking about sort of the internet access and broadband issues.
Sure.
I know I've seen and read a lot about that, how Matt's working with students who might have access challenges, and how the district is thinking about that in terms of other partners engaged in that work too.
Absolutely. Well, let me first introduce myself. I'm Cindy Corcoran. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Support Services for Rockingham County Schools. And just to say, instructional support services encompasses a big umbrella. It certainly takes care of people like your Exceptional Children's Program. If you've heard of MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, takes care of the mental health services that are part of the school system and what we do for students, the day treatment program, Head Start, preschool, nurses, social workers, counselors, dropout prevention, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. There's a lot of people that kind of fall under that umbrella of support. But our college advisors are a part of that just because they are part of that group that I work with as a liaison. And I've worked with Yolanda Keith for a long, long time, and she is fabulous. That what the College Corps does to select these college advisors and bring them into Rockingham County is stupendous. And we are so fortunate. We've had such great college advisors. And I want to say Matt is like a standout. That's the other thing. He's a true standout. And I recognize that very quickly on about this young man. He's somebody that you definitely want to have be as a college advisor in a school. And I think he landed in the right place too. I think he landed in the right school. And that's part of what Yolanda does as well, is that she kind of does that, right? So to get back to your question, and I don't mean to take time, I just wanted to kind of put this picture together of what people can see. I'm sorry, I talk a lot with my hands. Many people tell me that. So just to say that. Well, first of all, too, I will say it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing and a curse to live in a rural community. It's a blessing because everybody knows everybody, and everybody is excited to hear the great news, and everybody mourns when there's bad news for each other. So, with COVID, obviously, this has created quite a challenge for a rural community, but, Matt is right, and you are right, Meredith. It's a wonderful opportunity also to kind of, gather together and really bond as a community, but also kind of pool your resources and say, these are the things that we're going to do. And when you find individuals like Matt and the other college advisors who are stupendous as well, what you find is these are great assets because they can really connect to students in a way that, as Matt mentioned, is just not possible maybe as an older adult. I doubt that I would connect as well with our high school students as Matt does, you know, and so I see that and recognize that. As far as broadband and width, let me just say this, we have been really blessed. We have a chief technology officer. Her name is Casey Singent, and she is fabulous at trying to find resources for hotspots and places, you know, where kids can go and connect. So we've utilized our libraries, our community libraries in a greater way. We've made sure that libraries were open in the evening time. So our libraries have partnered with us. We've also partnered with Sprint. Sprint provided every school with 50 hotspots. And so we were able to, you know, apply for that grant and get that grant. And that allowed us to give, or just dispense those hotspots to those families that early in March, when everybody was sort of scrambling about what were we going to do about, you know, access for kids, getting those hotspots was really incredibly important. Are we reaching every family? I'll just be honest with you. No, we're still struggling. I mean, I can think of a couple of places out towards the Bethany area that it doesn't matter what kind of a hotspot you have, you're not going to reach you're not going to be able to reach into everybody's home and be able to do that. But our schools, what we've also done is, you know, said to our families, you know, if you can't come in our building, come to our buildings, park in the parking lot and use our internet, you know, just anything that you can do to create spaces for people to find places to do work and to connect. And so we've been very fortunate. And I just want to put a plug in for the Rockingham County Education Foundation and the Reidsville Area Foundation. I see that Tango Moore is on and a couple of other folks. We couldn't do this work without them. And I know Yolanda probably said that already, but I will just reiterate that. Like these are groups and organizations that without their solid support, this wouldn't be happening. So when you think about rural communities, you know, the other piece of this is for anybody listening, you have to build those relationships and seek out those partners that can do the kinds of things for school districts that you need, you know, so very important.
Thank you so much. And I will echo, I'm always doing something with my hands. So on Zoom, I find myself seeing myself in the screen and I'm like, hands down, hands down. Why are your hands all up here? Thank you so much for that. And I think what you hit on really is the importance of one, finding the right fit for partnerships and relationships, the importance of building those relationships for partnership, and then finding the right partners to be at the table in the conversation. And I'm really excited to see Tango and Meryl both on this call today. I get to work with them on another work group, so it's really fantastic to see them. We are at 11:40, and it is time to, we're going to transition to some breakout rooms. As you rejoin us from your breakout room, if you have questions you'd like to put into the chat, I'll read those out and give the panelists a chance to respond and provide some thoughts and feedback. And then if you don't want to put them in the chat, but you'd rather ask those questions out loud, feel free to take yourself off mute, but keep yourself on mute otherwise, just so we can avoid too much background. Oh, Caroline's group has a lot of questions, so that's great. Trisha, are you going to put your questions in the chat, or would you like to just offer those up to the group?
Well, I'll go ahead since I hit return and it sent it without having the questions in it.
Fantastic.
So I'll start with two main ones. What is the retention rate for, well, I guess a lead-up question was, a student in our group asked whether or not a current advisor could say whether or not his interest in being a math teacher, if being an advising core advisor would be helpful in him making that, anyone actually making that decision to go into teaching. And then his follow-up question was, what is the retention rate for advisors once they complete the program staying in the area? And then a third question is, how often do barriers from family members enter into helping a student navigate the pathway to college, whether it be food insecurity, incarceration, drug use, more social barriers. What are the resources to help the advisor navigate those barriers?
So I'll touch base, I guess, on the retention rate for advisors coming back to the community, and then touch base on the teacher piece. And then Matt, if you don't mind taking the rest of the teacher piece in that last question as well. Is that okay? Cool. So the retention rate for advisors, I'll say at a normal year, about 80 to 85% of our advisors return for a second year. And then advisors traditionally go off to grad school after they finish up their terms of service with us. So many times that is the trajectory for advisors. With that being said, we do have a number of advisors that stay within the workforce. We have a small number of advisors that actually stay within their schools. Sometimes the schools will hire them on as teachers to work within the school, or in other positions, but just because they have built that rapport and have kind of showed that they would be successful there. A number of advisors, when they do go in the workforce, though, they do stay within the public service space. So whether that is working for other college access organizations, working for an institution to really dive into and support persistent stuff. But a large number of our advisors do go off to graduate school. With regards to becoming a teacher and thinking about this work as well, I would say, the College Board has done some studies, and they actually show that teachers actually have the most influence, even over a college advisor, as it relates to a student going off to school. And so that's because the students see the teachers all the time. So they see the teacher, at least 2 to 3 times a week for a couple hours. And so that teacher's influence on a student, or the ability to influence that student, is high. And so imagine being a teacher, you had the experience of being a college advisor, you understand the process, you know how to fill out the FAFSA, you understand all these different places, and you're able to integrate that conversation as somebody who, again, is inspiring these students and educating them and moving them forward. And I think, again, the ability to be exposed to this piece as not necessarily an outsider, because like Matt said, he's inside the school, he's running inside the school as if he works for the school district. But you're getting a very different perspective because you're having relationships with a lot of people. So, I like to say that we have somewhat a perspective with the principals because we have rapport with them and they're telling us things. There's a different perspective that counselors have about their work, a different perspective that teachers have, different perspective than maybe the janitorial staff has. And being able to kind of gather all that and understand can help someone greatly as they transition into the school, working in other positions to be able to impact students. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I was going to speak about the same thing with respect to becoming a teacher. Like, I have so much more of an appreciation for how college admissions works and the things that my students as seniors should have done, or the ones that are succeeding in the process have done, to be able to be in a position to continue their education. And if you're a person eventually who wants to be dispensing that knowledge to students, or dispensing like core subject matter, you can also have that added like carrot of like, hey, I know college admissions really well, and I see this potential in you, and I think you'd be really great, but what you've done in my class hasn't reflected that. And I think it's an additional opportunity to be a mentor. Or you're doing a great job, keep it up. I know college admissions, and a college is going to love you, especially like if that student doesn't seem to have the confidence they need. So I think if anything, it's a great, it would go very well, especially if you want to teach at the middle or high school level. And I think that, like, for me, I don't intend to stay in education, but as I'm heading off to a new career, I think having this experience of like advising and like working one-on-one with students and listening, practicing those active listening skills, and learning what a student intends or needs and trying to help them reach that goal is going to be a great skill, a life skill, but also a skill as an attorney as I'm advising clients one day. And then the second question, I'm not sure if I caught the entire question. Could you repeat it quickly? The third question?
I think it was around how often do advisors run into barriers from families that I think you touched on a little bit, you know, poverty, food insecurity, incarceration, drug use, and those kinds of barriers that, and then what resources do you have to help address them?
Right. So that happens. It's not an everyday occurrence by any means, but it does happen, and we expect it to happen. Where we specifically address it during our summer training, like this is going to happen, and we need to be aware of the people around us who are trained to deal with it. So we have our social workers and counselors on staff. Like I've had students talk to me about like very serious mental health issues or something that's very serious happening with their family, and to which I immediately like let them know that I am here for them, but I'm also an employee. Like I work at the school and I have to like connect them to resources. So just letting them know that like that's the way it's going to be. But also like in a less serious manner, like some students go through really tough issues with like their family shifting around and they're ready to get out of the county. They're ready to get as far away as possible. And just talking through that with students and like helping them realize, well, like, yes, that may be true, but there are also things here that can help things be affordable and make it easier on you afterwards. I'm trying to think like there's so many, as I'm sure everyone knows, like idiosyncrasies within like each individual situation that it's hard to like make general statements about like, yes, we have these resources, we do these things. But I think we're really lucky in Rockingham County to have really, really good counseling staff and also like a team of people who work at central office to help us address these issues. And at Moorhead High School, we have a good administration team that we can like, they're cool talking to students one-on-one as well. And we work as a team and really try to address these issues head on. And sometimes it's just like emotional things that students are going through. Like their parents are really in some financial stress right now. And they think that by filling out the FAFSA, they're going to make it even worse because of tax situations, or like maybe they don't think they filed taxes correctly and they don't want to be put on the wrong like dependency paperwork or something like that. There's always anxiety when you're dealing with people's finances, and just trying to be a calm, like prepared with facts resource. That's sort of our role. And also just like to be a mentor. Like we can't address some of these like deep-seated issues just through like I'm your college advisor, right? We also have to ask about people's like lives as well, and like be there for them and listen to them and realize that not every conversation I'm going to have with a student is going to be about college admissions. Like I'm going to ask about how their basketball game went on Friday. I'm going to ask about like how their little brother's doing or things like that. I hope that's a good answer. That's kind of all I have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for that. Gosh, I see a lot of questions, and it's exciting because I think you all have generated so much conversation and a sense of people wanting to better understand like how you're supporting students. There are a lot of questions sort of related to engagement beyond sort of the classroom and college space. So connecting with students, you mentioned you coached soccer. I will say from what I recall when I got to work more closely with this program, it was often the case that advisors found themselves coaching sports or leading a club and things like that. So it looks like there's a question about how you get involved and stuff like that. Questions about how you support particularly first generation students in terms of parent engagement. And then how are your students preparing and feeling with the uncertainty for college preparation in a virtual learning environment? So I think there's some questions around those pieces.
So I'll say, just kind of talking through a little bit about our training. And so the training is basically giving the tips, tricks, and tools to do this work as a college advisor, but it's also building a community of advisors and talking about these social justice issues, these environments that we're working in, the circumstances of our students, to hopefully ground us with a realistic perspective. So what we know is that every single student is not going to want to go to college. It may take a year or two for them to decide that they want to do that, or they may say they don't want to do it at all. But it doesn't mean that we won't talk to that student or support them or guide them. And a student may say, you know, a year after I want to go to college, we want to make sure that they understand they can come back to the high school and talk to that advisor if they need to. In addition to that, we're still giving them information that would be relevant whenever they're deciding to make that jump if they want to. So I do want to kind of acknowledge that. So like the question about like financially able and emotionally ready, you know, if advisor comes in first year, they may not be able to kind of assess those things until the student fills out the FAFSA. What we're there to do is to really, again, walk alongside them, give them as much information as possible, do outreach to parents, whether that's cold calling, texting, you know, emailing them, trying to have some type of engagement and making sure that they're informed as well. But also making sure that they understand the various opportunities. So just because you apply to Carolina doesn't mean that we're going to recommend, or you could get into a Carolina, we're not going to recommend that you apply to the community college. And just because you want to apply to the community college doesn't mean that we're not going to recommend that you apply to Harvard or Yale. So we want to make sure that we're exposing students to various options based off of their criteria, their academic credentials, and then talking to them about what fit actually looks like. Because again, we don't want to shuffle students off. So if they're not emotionally prepared, that's something that they, you know, may come to light as we're kind of mentoring and guiding the student. But we don't want to just send students off to somewhere that we don't think that they would be successful, period. And I also bring that to, you know, a topic of discussion as we think about the diversity of institutions, right? So, you know, yeah, we're having conversations about the murder of George Floyd, right? What does it look like to have Confederate statues on institutions' campuses? Like, what does that feel like for a student of color when all these horrible, disrespectful things are happening and they're finding out about them on social media? So I just say that to say, like, yes, first generation, low income, underrepresented. There's so many things to talk about with students. There's so many things that they're thinking about. And there's no like special formula as it relates to all this. But again, like the hope is that Matt is built up and he feels comfortable having conversations, navigating and supporting students while he's in their schools. I don't know if I answered your question, Meredith.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, I think the value of that training that you all do cannot be overstated, right? And I think as we think even more broadly about partnership, this goes back to the building relationships and going in with some humility and cultural competence to that space. You can't walk in pretending you know everything about a community if you've never been in that community. Right. I think that's one of the things that Yolanda's team does so well is and makes the near peer program successful is identifying students that have some attachment and knowledge of walking a path that feels similar. But more than that, they train these students to walk into that space, recognizing that they may not have all the answers, and that's okay. And that they may need other resources and partners to help those students. So I don't think that the training piece to build that competence can be overstated in terms of thinking not just about partnerships and advising, but partnerships more broadly in rural communities. So are there other questions that groups came up with? Or I also wanted to call everybody's attention. Stephen from HubZone Tech put his email in the chat and said he would love to connect with anyone or group interested in the ability to help groups that need to assist students in need. It looks like they do laptop distribution for students in need. So again, part of the hope of these webinars is that we're building and facilitating relationships and new connections. So if that connection is helpful to you, we would encourage you all to contact Stephen directly. Did I miss questions in the chat? If I did, please chat them again or take yourself off mute and ask those directly.
Hey, Meredith, I see one question. This is Al from Greta regarding how do you work with students to hopefully encourage them to return back to those rural communities after they finish? Would you like to respond to that?
And also, I'm not sure, because it wasn't my question, but I think that actually may relate to the retention question that came
Okay.
out of my group. I think
Okay.
you answered a broader question, but I think that the question that came out of my group was a little bit also about what's the retention for the communities
Mm-hmm.
where the students were, where the advisors were placed. So
Yeah, that question really brings it to mind is how do we incentivize that as well, right? How do we, because that's what we're seeing is this brain drain where you can get these students into the best elite colleges of North Carolina, but typically they're not returning back home.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The group I was in actually brought that question up. One of the things I will say is that for us, as we're looking at college enrollment with students, over half the students that we advise actually go to the community college. So that percentage is actually higher than students that go off to 4-year and 2-year. With that being said, the careers that students at the community college are exposed to or engaging in may be pretty diverse based off of what the community college actually offers, and also the exposures of the students. So one of the questions that came up in my group was about like, how do you, being able to trickle some of this college access information down to elementary schools and middle schools, but we're often kind of struggling with the question of exposing students to careers. So one of the things that I brought up was like civil engineering.
I'm on 2 Zooms, so I had to make a new Gmail Zoom.
Mm-hmm. We're like civil engineering. So, oftentimes students don't understand that all cities and counties and, municipalities need a civil engineer, but they don't know exactly what that means within the communities that we serve. And so one of the things that we're hoping is, and sometimes even advisors do programming around careers, right? So just bringing professionals in to have conversations with students so that they know, not necessarily talking about the process of getting to college, talking about the FAFSA, but like, what can you actually do with this college degree? More specifically, what can you do right here in your community? I do think that it is a challenge. As I mentioned before, like we oftentimes get asked about, we want our students to come back, right? We want our students to come back. And I brought up an example, like there's a couple of communities in North Carolina that actually offer scholarships for students to go off and then come back to the community. And they may have to come back home for a number of years, but it at least brings the students back home. I know those opportunities cost money with scholarships or whatever, but the challenge oftentimes is number one, the exposure to jobs that are within the community, and then the actual jobs that are within the community that the student can take advantage of if they come back from going away from school.
Yeah, and I love Yolanda too, just thinking about the leveraging of partnerships and relationships, right? Because I know that there's so many folks who are sort of invested in how do we support these students on the path that makes the most sense for them. And the fact that 50% of your graduating students are applying to community college, and recognizing the community college system in North Carolina is an incredible resource, right? And the connection of that community college to our 4-year institutions and how we bridge those partnerships to best support students on their path is just incredibly important and valuable. So I think often people are like, oh, for high school to 4-year, but many of our rural students, for all sorts of reasons, whether it's family, financial, or they need to stay close to home for a couple of years, choose that path or they are interested in a trade profession, and that is the best path for them. But recognizing that there's also partnership bridges between those community colleges and 4-year institutions across our state is cool too. I see a note from Tango. Tango, feel free to take yourself off mute to share more about that program. I know we got about 5 minutes before we wrap up, so I want to make sure any last thoughts get shared.
Okay. I was saying in Rockingham County, our college advisors, not only are they at our high schools, but we also have career coaches from our community college that the advisors can partner with and talk over situations and circumstances with students who are either not interested in pursuing 4-year, or they're not yet prepared. And so I think that that's also an additional resource, so that all the students are being served, not just the students who are projected to go on to four-year institutions. And one of the things that I did want to share about our college advisors is the fact that they are so, not only are they really, really connected to our schools, the school administration, our central office, but they're really connected to our local nonprofits, and they're engaging and, they're working to be even more engaged with, say, like churches. They know that every student, the parent may not be the primary support person through this process. So it could be a pastor or, someone else. So they're really working hard to make sure that they're connected and getting their information out to churches, to our nonprofit organizations, and participating in things like our elected officials breakfast and partnering with Next Gen through NC Works and, our TRIO program through our community college. They look to build strong partnerships whenever they can, because they know that the end result is more support for our high schoolers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Meredith, can I add something just to
Of course.
tag on? So I was mentioning in our group too.
Meryl, introduce yourself so people know who you are and what organization you're with.
I'm so yeah, thank you. My name is Meryl Holloway. I'm with NC 100. We're a nonprofit, and we are located primarily in Rockingham County. And one of the things that we found successful, Alan, to kind of piggyback in the conversation about how to build this this connection back to careers and connecting the core advisors and other people in the community, is we have this strong base of former Rockingham County alumni that they do not live in Rockingham County, but they care about Rockingham County. I'm from Rockingham County. I do not live there. I'm living here in Wake County, but we care enough about the county to be able to expose young folks to different ideas and careers. And Destiny Talley, who was a core advisor with you guys, serves on our board of directors. And so that's another thing that, Matt, that I really enjoyed, as you talked about, like this really deep connection to community that the advisors sometimes make. And so we've done partnerships with Tango and the Area Foundation, where we've had career pathway conversations where we brought in people from the community to talk a little bit about careers so people can ask questions. And so I really do think that creativity, I think some of the advisors in previous years have been involved in Money Matters programs with state employees credit unions. So there's a myriad of ways that this program can connect to community and be innovative in finding ways to connect and support. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Meryl. Well, it is 12:25. I know it's Monday. It is cold and rainy outside. I love Al and Tango's sort of conversation in the chat about this is really about community engagement. This is about community engagement through partnership and relationship. And I really want to applaud the work that's happening in Rockingham County, the partnerships between the schools and Carolina College Advising Corps, with support from Reidsville Area Foundation and Rockingham County Foundation, like bringing together funding sources and students who are interested, or alumni of UNC who are interested in supporting community, and then the school districts themselves, really in an effort to better support students on their pathway from high school to their next steps. Just a few logisticals. A huge thank you to the planning team that's put these webinars together: Dane, Caroline, Margaret, and Keisha, who's not here, and Dane for his expertise in pulling together breakout rooms. I still, as much time as I spend on Zoom, I have not figured out breakout rooms, which is a terrible thing to admit. Maybe I'll get some lessons. So huge thank you to you guys for pulling that together. We will send everybody who is registered today, we'll send a copy of the recording. I think we also talked about doing a participant guide that would have names and email addresses and organizations as maybe a follow-up in case you want to make connections with one another following the event. So we'll be in touch about that. And we just want to say thank you again for spending an hour and a half of your Monday mid-morning with us. And we really appreciate the panelists. And thank you guys for your work. But thank you also for your presentation today and generating such a good conversation. We appreciate all of you.
Hey, Meredith, just to wrap up, this is Tricia Daisley. I just wanted to reiterate your point about the partnership in Rockingham County in particular, that when it was originally started, a one donor, Carolina, Lee Najelski, very instrumental in, he heard a presentation by Steve Farmer at the Board of Visitors, and went in with a lot of help from lots of individuals, brought in the Rockingham Area Foundation, an educational foundation, to expand and actually become the first county in North Carolina to expand College Advising Corps. You know, it goes from organizations, but also can start with one individual too. So it's a, you know, and I'm a huge advocate. I love it. It's been one of my favorite things in my whole time working at Carolina. So thanks to everybody who's keeping it going and making it better.
And if you'll all complete the survey, we'd appreciate it. Thank you again, and everybody stay safe and healthy.